This is Anita from Reluctant Low Carb Life. If anyone has struggled with addiction, and specifically sugar addiction, you understand that sugar can be and is very addictive. Today I want to talk about or answer the question, is sugar an addictive substance? I believe sugar is, yes, an addictive substance. Why? Because the sweetness in our mouth and in our brain, it causes our dopamines, and that's why you feel so good after you eat sugar. Your brain, it just triggers something in your brain, you feel good, you have this high, and then you have this low. And then you want it again, so you eat it again, so you get this high and then this low. It's sort of like this reward sort of circuitry that goes around with sugar. Releases this dopamine compared to certain types of drug or drug abuse. In fact, there's some people that say that sugar is addictive as things like cocaine, that sugar can be extremely addictive. Some people have a higher tolerance for it than others. But of course, if you don't have a high tolerance and the withdrawal, it can be very difficult for you to withdraw from sugar completely. That's why you can sit down, and I've done this, and maybe many of you out there are feeling like this. Maybe suddenly you have a bag of M&Ms, and before you know it, you've eaten the whole bag. Like I'm not talking a small bag, I'm talking a bigger bag, right? And because small bag, anybody can eat through those. It becomes, you're just sitting there and before you know it, you're eating that, not even realizing you're eating it. And suddenly you've eaten it. Or a whole box of cookies where you're eating it and you didn't even realize that whole box of cookies is now gone. That's because the way the sugar makes us feel and how addictive sugar is into our brains, that there can be this psychological aspect of sugar addiction. People have actual withdrawals from sugar. You can feel actual withdrawals from it. It can change your mood swings. You don't feel maybe as happy when you don't have sugar in your life. You have withdrawal symptoms like you would have from maybe if someone who had like a drug addiction. But there is a cost to our sugar addiction. And that's one of the big problems here is that there is a health cost to our sugar addiction. Excessive sugar leads to chronic, diseases, as we know. That's why, diabetes has gone up so much, especially the last 20 or 30 years, that diabetes has gone up very, very high because of the overconsumption of sugar. Most of us are eating more sugar than what we think we're eating. You ask a lot of people, they might say, well, I don't eat much sugar. I don't eat hardly any sugar at all. But what the problem today is so many people are eating processed foods and multi-processed foods that it's not just the candy you're eating. Of course, if you're eating candy, you understand that you're eating sugar. It's all the added sugars, which is in the food that we are not expecting it to be in the foods itself, which is causing us to have more sugar and sugar addiction than we've ever had before. So, there's different ways that we can look to combat this. First of all, the number one way is to start with education, is educating yourself about the perils of sugar. And two, starting to eat, as we talk about, eating fresh foods and foods that are fresh that help give you satiety. If you're going to eat sugar, then add the sugar in yourself. In other words, if you're going to decide you're going to have a cookie, well, then bake the cookie yourself. So you know how much sugar is exactly in that cookie. If you are going to have sugar in something you cook, you add that sugar and you know how much it is. Or do like I do, substitute for great sugar substitute like monk fruit sugar, which I will, if a recipe calls for some sugar, it needs a bit of sweetness, I will use monk fruit sugar, which has 0 calories and doesn't work the same way as sugar does, but also still gives you the sweet taste. So find ways to educate yourself and to be creative with it, but don't buy all these packaged or packaged foods which you don't know how much sugar is in there, and then really you're eating more sugar than what you think you are because you're eating those packaged foods, or you're eating out in places and you don't know how much sugar has been added into the food that they are serving you there. That's why things like fresh foods and whole foods is a great way for you to go, because you can really understand what kind of sugar you have in there. So when we ask the question, is sugar addictive? My answer to it is yes, that I believe sugar is an addictive substance. My coworker, James Johnson, has written a blog post on this called "Is Sugar an Addictive Substance?" where he goes into a lot more detail than I have, and he talks a lot about sugar and how sugar is an addictive substance. If you're interested, we will put a link to the blog post in the description below so that you can read more about that and discover why sugar is addictive. So just in closing, just to remind you, my rules on sugar is: one, if you're cooking, use a sugar substitute, something like a monk fruit sugar. If it recalls for a little bit of sweetness, which recipes do, we like that sweet taste in our mouth, it will not work the same as an addiction as it does for real sugar. If you can't, put in less sugar than maybe what the recipe calls for. And eat fresh foods. That's what we talk about here a lot, because at least you know then how much actual sugar is in that food. Or get your sugar in other ways, like fruits and in natural ways, which is far better for you than eating, just sugar plain. And understanding that when you do eat candy does have sugar, or cookies or packaged cookies, or all those things have sugar in them. And a lot of the prepackaged foods have sugar in them. So you're eating a lot more sugar than what you think you are when you're eating those things. So be realistic about your sugar intake along with your sugar addiction. This is Anita from Reluctant Low Carb Life. Thank you so much for listening. Subscribe, become part of our community, and we'd love to hear from you and love to hear what you have to say. Thank you.